disadvantage of these programs, so we couldn't earn some of the income we're expecting. The next slide, Elia. I'm going to skip this slide, Chair. These are just all more and more of the other projects and initiatives that were affected. In terms of KPIs, we didn't give details in this meeting because the CSIR executive will be presenting the revised KPIs to the board on Friday. But we can confirm here that quite a lot of our KPIs are affected in terms of our scientific output, in terms of our finances, a little bit on our human capital. But Chair, I think in good time, we will be able to share more detail with you on that after we've then gone through the process with the board. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elia. I think it's the CFO that comes after me. Thank you.
Yeah, that's correct. So the next section, Honorable Chair, will be an assessment of the impact of these reductions in our income statement and cash flow. Ashraf.
Thank you, CEO. Honorable Chairperson, honorable members, good evening. I think this is just an overview, and we have covered some of these, but the main impact is the reduction in the parliamentary grant and also the reduction in our contract income, as my colleagues have spoken about. We can move to the next slide. Chairperson, this is a reflection of the impact on our income statement. So if we look at the third column, the variance to original budget, our contract and R&D income, that's the research income that we generate both locally and internationally, that's forecast to be reduced by 245 million. As we've indicated, our parliamentary grant will go down by 10%, and we've spoken a lot about that. Various colleagues have touched on that. In terms of our running costs, we've spoken about utilities being reduced and other costs related to contract work that we do. So that will reduce by 78 million. Our manpower costs will reduce by 180 million as a result of not filling non-critical vacancies and also not granting an increase in October when increases are due. So all in all, we'll move from a break-even situation that we had originally planned for the year to a net loss of 83 million, taking into account all the positives and negatives that we have. Can move to the next slide. Chair, this is just an indication of what our cash flow would normally look like. And so this is an example from the previous financial year, just to give you an overview of the trends. You can move to the next slide. And this is an indication of what the cash flow would have looked like had we had no decrease in the parliamentary grant. So taking into account all the other changes that we've discussed, but no change on the parliamentary grant, and the impact on our cash would have been about 250 million lower than what we had originally budgeted for. You can move to the next slide. So this is the actual situation for April, May, and June, and then the forecast for July to March. So we can see, and this includes the reduction in the parliamentary grant. So all in all, we have lost about, or we forecast to lose about 350 million rand in cash due to the COVID-19 and adjustments that we've had to make, and our cash balance will be about 900 million at the end of the year if things go according to what we forecast. You can move to the next slide. This is just a graphical representation of the previous slide, it's to show how our cash will reduce over the period from 1.3 billion in April to 900 million at the end of the year. You can move to the next slide. Chair, we've also done some scenario analysis with modeling some different scenarios, a 10% PG cut, a 20% PG cut, and a 40% PG cut. And if we look at a 40% PG cut, we'll lose an additional 400 million rand. And that will have serious implications on the financial sustainability of the CSIR going forward. We can move to the next slide. And this is the last slide on the financial impact. Just an analysis of our debtors book from June last year to June this year, showing a significant increase in our debtors. Even though income is reduced in the first quarter of the financial year, debtors have still gone up, and there's been because of the downturn in the economic situation, customers are struggling to fulfill their obligations to us, and we could see an increase in bad debts as we go forward. Thank you, Chair. My colleague Matodi Masaramule will take us through the next portion of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. In the remaining 7 minutes, Dr. Rachel Chikwamba and Dr. Matodi Masaramule will speak to a few examples of some of the work that we've started to do in support of the national response to COVID-19. So Dr. Masaramule first, a few minutes, and then Dr. Chikwamba.
Yeah, we can add extra 5 minutes for you.
No, thank you very much, Chair, for your generosity. So colleagues, 5 minutes each, please, if we can try and do that.
Okay. Thank you, CEO, Honorable Chair, and honorable members. Could you please move the slide, Ilya, to the next? So I'll speak to the matters on the left-hand side of the slide, and Dr. Chikwamba will speak to the matters on the right-hand side. The next slide, please. So I think here, honorable members, you see the ecosystem coming to the party. This is the ecosystem under the Department of Science and Innovation that has come together, including the CSIR and other groupings. So the first one there, there's a locally designed and developed ventilator under contract from the Solidarity Fund. So with this one, colleagues, the design effort started in March, and already in June, in late June, we had gotten approval for the medical approval for this. And as we speak, the 10,000 ventilators are scheduled to be delivered. That will be crucial for the management of the COVID-19. And the Minister of Health has indicated a desire to have an additional 10,000 ventilators produced in the same period. So we're very excited about this. The second one, the previous slide, please. The facial shields that were developed through the existing technology at the CSIR was delivered. These were delivered to the South African National Defence Force, and another collaborative effort, largely by entities that are associated with the Department of Science and Innovation, includes the predictive modeling of COVID-19 that look into the near horizon in terms of focus, the number of cases, positive cases, the number of deaths, for decision-making support on ICU beds, ventilators, lockdown measures for the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, working with South African Medical Research Council, UP and VETS. This has been a very crucial and very successful cross-organizational effort that has had a strong leadership from the Department of Science and Innovation that has worked really well, and I think is supporting the national effort quite well. The next slide, please. The next slide, please, Elia. So on this particular slide, on the right-hand side, you can see an interactive map of vulnerable communities for the National Disaster Management Center being created to indicate where efforts should be focused, because we anticipate that to see steep fatalities and steep steep setbacks in terms of populations of vulnerable communities. So this also speaks to the center that was developed for the Department of Health, and this has been expanded to a decision support center for other departments and agencies. And again, here we have a strong involvement and leadership from the Department of Science and Innovation being involved. And we greatly appreciate that. The last one, there is a mobility platform. So here we use mobile telephone companies' data like Vodacom and MTN to understand movement patterns, to support a lockdown and to predict where the next risk areas are going to be, depending on where people move. So here we use the movement of cell phones as a proxy for movement of people, and for support of lockdown compliance and for helping with tracing. Next slide, please. So we've also created the impact of COVID-19 on small businesses to inform government on the most appropriate support tools and packages for each sector. And there has been the assistance to water boards and utilities to ensure that drinking water does not contain causative agent of COVID-19, and we haven't detected anything thus far. I'll stop here and hand over to Dr. Chikwamba.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maseremule and CEO, Honorable Chair and Honorable members and our colleagues from the DSI. If I can have the next slide, please, Elia. My colleague, Dr. Maseremule, has responded to and highlighted the response in engineering, modeling and manufacturing. I'm going to be talking about how we've answered the clarion call to action in the life sciences. And I will highlight only but a few of the initiatives in this presentation. One that I would like to highlight on this particular slide is how we have supported and come to the party by supporting the NHLS with surge capacity. We have converted some of our BSL, biosafety level 2 and 3 laboratories that we normally use for research with infectious pathogens into COVID-19 testing laboratories. We have managed to get certificate, well, not certification, but qualification from the NHLS, and we are indeed providing support with the backlog that they have in COVID-19 testing. The last 2 points on this slide speak to initiatives that have been in the news lately, where the team at the CSIR has developed a Quantitative Pcr Kit that really rapidly detects COVID-19. So it's a homegrown kit which is supported by the local manufacturer of diagnostic enzymes and the local manufacturer of antibodies. So all the reagents are made locally. This is to address the challenge of reagent availability and kit availability across the globe that we intermittently experience. So homegrown solutions are being brought to bear here. And this is an initiative that is supported by the DSI, but as well as CSIR supported startup called KBio. Next slide, please. In the next slide, we talk about the work that the CSIR is doing with respect to testing medicinal plants to see their effectiveness against COVID-19. So there is select medicinal plants and herbal mixtures that are indigenous to South Africa that we, the CSIR, is part of a consortium that includes universities, UKZN, the Innovation Hub, the MRC, and many others are driving. Our part there is product and process development, and we want to see if any of these indigenous materials can be remedies to this COVID-19 and the conditions that it causes disease-wise. Related to this, and maybe a separate point that I want to make here, is that we know that cash is one of the areas in which the virus can be transmitted. The virus survives on money bills. We're working with the private sector and initiated conversations with the central bank to see how we can look to solutions that include sanitizing money, but also making sure that it is potentially pre-coated with antiviral products that would prevent viral transmission. Early days yet for this project, but it is one that we believe is promising. On the next slide, we talk about work that we're doing in supporting the Department of Transportation, looking at the intensity of usage of taxi ranks, the processes and procedures, and how that has got implications on viral transmission. And a separate project also on this slide has to do with looking at studies that review the economic impact of COVID-19, in particular working with the Northwest on how COVID-19 is impacting their economy with respect to the environment, tourism, and other sectors that drive the Northwest economy. On the next slide, we highlight a few more initiatives that have to do with traditional medicines. I won't carry on at length because these are some things that we've spoken to already, but the new and unique thing that I want to highlight on this slide is how we are using plant platforms to look at subunit vaccines in work that we have presented to NEPAD as a regional program that we could get funded to create a homegrown vaccine solution. And lastly, I think we are looking also at the arts and crafts sector, where we are supporting the Department of Arts and Culture to see the impact of COVID-19 on that specific sector. Next slide. And lastly, we're looking at food safety and nutrition, where we're in discussions with basic education to look at some of our products that are nutritionally intense, very high protein content and very high essential mineral content products that could potentially be used in the nutritional programs for basic education. So there is a discussion that is going on with DSI and DBE. And we're also looking into aspects of food safety under the prevailing conditions of COVID-19, looking at how we can start to support a regional laboratory, the Regional Laboratories Association, with the key things that they have to look into with respect to food safety, a proposal we're discussing with UNIDO, and of course, then looking at developing solutions for rapid on-site mobile food and water safety testing. These are some of the initiatives that we are undertaking to support the COVID-19 clarion call to action and to support government in their response. And I would like to leave it there and hand it over back to the CEO.
No, thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable members. I hope this gives you a sense of the impact of the COVID-19 situation, the COVID-19 pandemic on the CSIR and the measures that we've put in place to try and mitigate this impact, as well as some of the work that we've been doing and continue to do to support the national response to COVID in line with our mandate, of course. So thank you very much. I will hand back to you, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, CEO and your team and the Chairperson. That was quite a very interesting presentation that you shared with us. I would like to thank you for the presentation. I hope members have been taking notes. They will engage with the presentation when we open up. I found it to be very interesting, the initiatives that you are taking in support of the efforts so the spread of COVID-19. Can we get to the last presentation? National Research Foundation.
Honorable Chair and honorable members.
Okay, let's start with the chairperson of the board, and then who can then do an overview and then hand over to the CEO.
Okay. Now, thank you, Honorable Chair. Good evening, and also to the members of the Portfolio Committee, and also the DG and the team from the DSI. Thanks for the opportunity afforded to the NRF to also present the adjusted budget for 2020-21, and also to look at the impact that this adjusted budget will have on the delivery of our mandate, as well as the programs for this year. And Chair, just to add that as we look into this presentation, it is important also just for the members to also appreciate and also have a better understanding of the principles which were implemented or effected in looking into the various budget cuts. And with that, Chair, I would like to then request the CEO to take us through the presentation. Thank you. CEO, over to you.
Madam Chair and Honorable Chair and members of the committee, honorable members, good evening. With your permission, Honorable Chair, I have been instructed to be the one who does the presentation, so I'll try and be under 30 minutes. My colleagues will then answer the difficult questions, and I believe our chairperson has agreed to take the most difficult question that will come later. We prepared this presentation, Chair, in anticipation for the meeting of the 8th of July. So you will see that we talk about preliminary allocations, and there are still refinements that we have to make now that we have received recently the actual allocation letter. Chairperson, the context, I think, is all known to all of us in terms of the social and economic impact of COVID-19. Our economy and the world economy has been significantly affected, if not severely affected. And all of us have to find a creative way of pulling and getting the wheel to the shoulder to the wheel to make sure that we support our government in the various interventions that need to be made. And science has an incredible role to play in this regard. And part of what I would like to put up front is that the science system has actually been working hand in glove in response to this particular pandemic. And a good example, Chairperson, is the National Ventilator Project, where the National Research Foundation and the CSIR, as neighbor institutions and as colleagues in the science system, have been working together. So the NRF, through the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, has been doing the coordination of the project, and while the CSIR has been leading us in the manufacture of those ventilators. And I think it shows that when we do work together in synergy, we can actually deliver a lot more. We presented to you, Chairperson, earlier this year the approved APP and associated budget, and we did indicate that it will have to be adjusted, as we did anticipate there will be necessity because of the impact of COVID-19. As I said earlier, Chair, we have graciously received from our colleagues in the DSI informal and preliminary revisions to the allocation, which enabled us to prepare this presentation. And we will, after this presentation, prepare, now that we have received the formal allocation, prepare a detailed revised budget, as well as the consequential revisions to the APP, which will be presented to the board next week on Wednesday for their consideration and hopefully approval prior to submission to the minister for his consideration and approval, and subsequent back to Parliament, Chairperson. When we presented to you in the 19th of May, this was what the picture looked like. The dark blue is the parliamentary grant allocation to the National Research Foundation for it to execute the mandate that it has been given in law. The light blue are the contracts that the DSI have requested the National Research Foundation to enter into. And then the green other contract income that we leverage from other partners, both here in the country and beyond. And the red line is the total. The picture, as we did indicate in May, Chairperson, was going to change, and it was going to be a downward adjustment due to the economic impact of COVID-19. Chair, this is what we presented. We had anticipated a 10%, as our colleagues had indicated earlier, 10% reduction in the parliamentary grant. Initially, we had anticipated a reduction of 780 million out of the 3.790 billion, giving us a revised budget of just over 3 billion rand for the financial year 2020-21. We did present to the committee chairperson a set of principles that inform the way in which we are approaching the reduction of our budgets to manage in a way that it not just merely fulfills the mandate of the organization, but in our view, Chair, it's important for us to make sure that we understand the importance of resources being an investment in science and not as an expenditure. It becomes particularly important to make sure that that investment is in terms of the current capacity, but well as looking after future capacity which will be needed the next time round that we have a major problem or we have other issues that we need to find solutions to. And therefore we need to, in the choices that we make, protect this investment that we are making. And it's not an investment in money, it's an investment in people, it's an investment in the knowledge infrastructure, the scientific infrastructure, and it is investment in capability and capacity more broadly. So what we have proposed, Chairperson, and we do believe our board in principle has supported this, that in support of our transformation agenda, budget cuts will not be implemented on active graduate internships, postgraduate student bursaries, postdoctoral fellows, and early and emerging career researchers. These are people who already hold a grant from us, have agreed to undertake work, have agreed to undertake their studies, and we are saying we should not tamper with them. We should not take any money back or ask them to give us any of the money that has been allocated to them. Mission critical projects and initiatives, whether it's in astronomy or in astrophysics or in any other knowledge domain, should not and will not be affected to ensure the continued operation, not just of the National Research Foundation, but the sustainability of the research enterprise. There are some things, Chair, if you stop them, they become almost impossible to start again. And then the third issue is about international infrastructure agreements. Those commitments need to be honored. And a good example is our commitment to the SKAO organization, of which we are a member of, but there are others as well. And that lastly, that we said we will apply differentially to active grant awards to establish researchers, including centers of excellence and chairs. In addition to that, Chair, we did indicate that there will be a number of cost containment measures that will be instituted. So programs focusing on mass participation will not be implemented or postponed. Local or international scientific conferences, science festivals such as the National Science Week that we always hold every year, the National Science Olympiads will not happen this year. Mission critical infrastructure projects will be delayed to outer years, and some initiatives will be postponed indefinitely or cancelled should the current trajectory of the fiscal situation prevail in the immediate future. We have introduced a temporary moratorium on filling of all vacancies, and clearly we need to reflect on the impact of that into the future, not knowing what our the fiscal budget will look like in the coming 2 or 3 or 4 years. And we are trying to do that while protecting, where possible, all active jobs, including instituting a review of cost of living adjustment in light of available resources. So we are wanting to make sure that we retain people, we retain good people, because we will need them as we go into the future. Chairperson, this is the preliminary NRF budget for 2020-21 due to COVID-19, coming out of the principles that we have adjusted. So a 10% reduction to the parliamentary grant, reduction in red of 96.6 million rand. With the new allocation, we'll come to what that money is used for in a few seconds. And then we have a range of contracts between the National Research Foundation and the DSI, starting with the SKA contract. 324 million rand has been shaved from the original allocation of 780. I'll come back to what that money is going to be used for and the impact thereof. Likewise, with human resource development, 253 million. No adjustment to the research and development infrastructure, adjustment downwards in science missions of 36.9 million, and a downward adjustment in the science engagement of 42 million, and the percentages are on the right-hand side. The baseline allocation of the parliamentary grant, as we all call it, is more, in our case, used not just merely for salaries, Chair. It is to run the organization and is to significantly advance the mandate of the organization. So we issue research grants from that, we issue bursaries from it, we provide support to centers of excellence, we maintain and grow the national infrastructure of the organization. So it actually does sustain the science system more significantly than not. The application of all those cuts presented in terms of the different areas of the work of the organization. And I would like to focus particularly on research innovation support, the national research infrastructure, science engagement, and the science missions of the National Science and Development Strategy. The column in red is obviously where the cuts are, and the percentage cuts are on the right-hand side. The established researcher grants will be a reduction of about 63 million. Emerging and early career research is 62 million. Student bursaries, you will see that because of the principle that we discussed earlier, we will only have 16 million, a reduction, and I'll explain how that came about. Likewise with internships, 18 million. The research chairs, 75 million. The science and technology agreements, 10 million, centers of excellence, 45, and operations more broadly to sustain this endeavor, an 8 million reduction. In the infrastructure, the science, national research infrastructure, the national research facilities, 18 million reduction. Global infrastructure, which includes the Square Kilometre Array, the Southern African Large Telescope, and others, 314 million. No adjustment with regard to equipment grants. Special projects, such as South African roadmap, research infrastructure roadmap, 10 million. And we suspended a number of what we had thought were important and key CapEx projects for the organization in this year. That was to the value of 25 million. Under science engagement, a reduction of 42 million, as I presented earlier, and the bulk of which is going under science awareness, with the reduction of 34 million, education 8, and operations 200. Under science missions, a total of 36, split in terms of global change 16.9, marine and Antarctic 18, and astronomy. And the percentages, Chairperson, are on the right-hand side. And so what does this then mean in terms of the impact? With regard to students and interns, Chairperson, all of these were awarded on or before the 31st of January this year. So we have a principle which says that before the academic year starts, a student must have a bursary in their hand. It is incongruous for them to be enrolled and not have a bursary in hand. We did, however, give the students up until 12th of June to accept our conditions, to accept those bursaries, because sometimes we offer the student a bursary and they do not necessarily accept it. And we did that because we moved the date to 12 June because of the COVID impact on the higher education system. 40% of those students' bursaries that were awarded were not taken up by June 2020. And you may ask why. And the reason, Chairperson, is quite simple. The bursary values that we currently have and we are awarding are relatively modest compared to the value of bursaries that people can get, students can get from other institutions. And that's partly why we have adjusted our student bursary policy effective 2021. There will be extension funding that will be required for studies in 2021, particularly for honors, final year masters, and doctoral students that will be considered from that money that we would have quote unquote saved from those students that did not take those bursaries. And similarly, with regard to interns, we are only supporting continued interns in their second year of appointment, other than the 28 new interns that were appointed at the DSI. Those are the only ones that will be supported in 2020. So we did not have a general intake like we normally do of interns in 2020. With regard to next year, Chair, but because some of the choices that we make need to be informed by what is coming, we do anticipate that 50% of those final masters and doctoral students will most likely require extended support. And that's something that we need to cater for going into the future. And part of that will most likely have an impact on the number of students that we will probably support in 2021. The bursary policy, we are hopeful, will result in more students accepting our bursaries and improving the retention and throughput from honors through to doctoral studies over time. The potential impact on researchers, including centers of excellence and chairs. Let me start first with the early emerging researchers. Again, grant award for 2020 were made by December 2019, before the academic year started. And so any savings that will accrue from grants not taken up, grant expenditure that could not be incurred as a result of COVID-19 pandemics, such as conferences, travel, and training, will then lead to the savings, so to speak. However, we do need to be mindful that this will also potentially have an impact on the projected completion times of the research projects, and thus consequentially the research productivity of the system as a whole. With the established researchers, similarly, those grant and grant holders were given their grants and grant holder linked bursaries in 2019 to ensure that everything is ready at the beginning of 2020. The components of these grants, such as trips, laboratory costs, conferences, travel, training, that will not happen likely will result in savings, so to speak, but will also result in less research productivity as well. So we need to be mindful of the trade-off of both sides. Standalone research grants, by way of example, the travel grants in 2020 will not be awarded, resulting in at least 270 fewer travel grants because of the travel restrictions that my colleagues have already made. And as we said earlier, as a general principle to affect and balance the challenge that is in front of us, we will have to apply a haircut to all COEs and SARTI chairs. Otherwise, we will not be in a position to make do. On research infrastructure, Chairperson, deferred projects, you recall that we deferred 25 million rand of expenditure, renovation of buildings. Some of the roofs are leaking, and we need to make sure that infrastructure does not deteriorate. IT upgrades, renewal of renewable energy initiatives, and a whole range of projects that have had to be postponed to affect the savings. The details of which we have and we can provide should there be a need. With the research road infrastructure, South African research infrastructure roadmap, some of these funds will be allocated to fulfill our commitment towards SALT, which is an international project. And the SKA project is another one, and we have the managing director of the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, who's a member of the board of the SKA, who's here. And I want to start by thanking Parliament for the ratification of the SKA Observatory Treaty, which happened on the 1st of June this year. And the budget cut that you see in there will not have any negative effect on the SKA project. We've said this over and over and over again, because these funds were accumulated as a result of the delays in the international project itself. We did not have to actually pay this money over to the SKO. However, we will continue to have to honor our commitments in 2021 and beyond as a member of the SKO and obviously as a host. And so that is something that we need to be mindful of in subsequent years. On science engagement, Chairperson, we have already indicated mass participation programs have been cancelled, postponed. And obviously there has had to be a reduction because the schooling system has also been disrupted. There has been a significant adjustment to the school calendar, which also has had an impact on the science Olympiads and competitions, which were cancelled this year, which affected overall learner and educator reach. So a whole range of educator programs have also been affected by the delays in the school calendar. And the youth service has also been reduced, affecting the number of unemployed graduates that will be taken up in work programs. On the Science Mission Chair, the Science Mission program, the grants that we allocate are generally to established researchers. And this year in 2020, we decided no new awards will be made in these initiatives, as cuts will be applied against funds not awarded or not taken up. And similarly, the global change allocation has enabled a significant saving through the postponement or the cancellation of the Global Change Biennial Conference, which is aimed at researchers and environmental study students from around the country. And so again, we were able to hold back on that. And similarly, the balance of funds of bursaries, of bursaries that were not taken up by the 12th of June will result in a reduction of the number of master's students across the science mission funded instruments. Chairperson, this is what we presented to you in May as the APP indicators and targets. There will be some which will clearly be in need of adjustment, and I will use an example of our KPI of the proportion of investment in science engagement. Given the significant reduction, those percentages are likely to have to be adjusted in one form or another. We are unlikely to keep that 3.5%. Others, we will go back and re-look and confirm, but we are likely to keep those proportions as they currently are. But this is a detail that we will be presenting to the board next week. Just to give a little bit of addition, with regard to the students, we've already talked about that, and the reduction with the researchers and the number of research grants that will be awarded might impact on the transformation profile of NRF-funded researchers. Although we say it will, we will be able to confirm that after we've done the detailed analysis. Research productivity will be negatively impacted due to the reduction and the productivity that our research system has had to deal with during the time of COVID. Science engagement, we have already talked about the investment target and the transformed leadership and management. Temporary moratorium of vacancies will have an impact on our ability to take advantage of filling certain positions in a manner that we had originally planned. But overheads, we are largely going to try our best through austerity measures to maintain and manage our costs within the targets that we had originally proposed. Chairperson, that is me. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, CEO. That was the presentation from NRF. I think all three of you did well in terms of time. So some of our guests, when we say present in 30 minutes, the first 20 minutes they take on context, approach and all of that. By the time they get to the issues, the time is up. But I think you did very, very well. So we've got sufficient time to engage with the presentations. And also in terms of the contents, I think we've got a better idea now as to what will be the impact of this budget cuts on the two entities and on the department. Yeah, so I would like to thank you for that. Can I get an indication from the members who would like to participate? I see Professor Bozzoli. It looks like Honorable Bozzoli is the only one who would like to engage. Honorable Mukacho. Boshoff. Okay, I've got 3 members for now. I don't see other hands. Let me see here. Honorable Mananiso. Okay. Honorable Litsie. I've got 5 members for now. And Honorable Gates. I've got 6 members. Okay, let's start with Honorable Bozzoli.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentations. This was not a happy meeting. These cuts are very serious and very sad because it looks as though the science system is going to be damaged by them in quite fundamental ways. And the concern, I think, for all of us should be how long-term are the effects of the cuts going to be? For example, if you cutting students and the department mentions about nearly 5,000 students will not be funded, from what I can work out, that is a lot of postgraduate students, careers not happening. And when it came to the Department of Higher Education, everyone was very very clear that they did not want to cut student funding. Now we have this department, and we find that they have no choice but to cut student funding. And postgraduate students are always sort of treated as second-class citizens, I think. Their funding is not given nearly as much consideration as the funding of undergraduate students. So to me, this is an extremely serious matter, as is the cutting of all the various projects that are not going to happen. So my overall question to the department is, how sure are you that the long-term effects of all of these cuts can be managed and will not damage the science system and the lives of students fundamentally? I mean, if you're a new postgraduate student, say just coming out of your third year, you're going into your honors year or your master's year, that starts next year in February, March, sometime around there, and you find that there is no funding for you because these cuts will last until March. What do? You have to drop out, and you'll probably never go back to being a student. So I find that this is a very serious matter. Plus, we don't know from the presentations as a whole yet how many students are really going to be affected, because the calculations the department gives are very much based on, they're hypothetical in a way. And when you look at the NRF presentation, we see that there are many, many cases where students will be affected, but they haven't yet been counted. For example, in the Centers of Excellence and the Chairs project. And in the CSIR, I would guess that every project that is being cancelled will affect students. So could we have from the department a much more careful calculation of the assumed number of students that is going to be affected by these cuts? Because I think that the committee really should object to this, and we should express our disappointment that the science system is being treated so badly. And if you think where this money is going, all right, some of this money will be going to good causes, such as the health system or social development, but some of it is going to the police and the army. So in order to fund the police and the army, we are cutting our precious science system back very, very severely. As far as so that's my first question. Please, could we have a detailed breakdown of the numbers of students? My second question is, what will the effect of the cutbacks on your laser, titanium, robotics, aerospace, and all of those kinds of projects be? Will they again be able to be rescued from the cuts? Or are those cuts going to have severe long-term effects? Second question of the CSIR is, I'm not sure why you mentioned or you kind of modeled a 40% cut in the parliamentary grant, as though that was a possibility. Can you please explain where you got the idea from that might be a possibility? Because that's extremely worrying if that 40% is floating around as a possible cut. So please, could you clarify that? Just to congratulate the CSIR on their amazing COVID work. And I see you've been doing a lot of the predictive modeling of the disease. Could we please see the modeling and have copies of your modeling? Because we would be very interested to see what the modeling says about the disease and where it's going. And then for the NRF, really, as the former chair of the NRF, I find it very sad that it's going through these cuts. Each project within the NRF is unbelievably precious and is regarded as such by people in universities, by students, by staff, by anyone who is serious about universities. And to see all of these projects being cut quite seriously is a huge concern, because I do think those cuts are going to have a long-term effect. I do not think these are short-term things that are just going to bounce back next year. So I was wondering what guarantee you have from Treasury that once these cuts are finished and done with, what guarantee do you have that the long term, that they aren't going to remain, or that the Treasury won't come to you and say, well, you managed without that money last year, you've got to manage without it again next year. We do need to get some guarantee from Treasury this is not a long-term problem. And if the committee can help in any way, I do think we should. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Bozoli. Honorable Mkhatshwa.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, one must begin by thanking all the presenters for their presentations. I am very concerned with regards to the cuts that have been made under research and development, which is program 4, particularly because, you know, that's a space of which we there are targets that are supposed to be made by particular timeframes, and one is concerned about the ability for us to meet those targets within the timeframes that have been set. And one also hopes that there has been a substantial consideration made for research and development that will be required in addressing and managing COVID-19. One must also then welcome the COVID-19 interventions that will be addressing or managing the COVID-19 pandemic as highlighted on slide 11. That would be from the department presentation, particularly when it speaks to indigenous knowledge systems in terms of remedies for COVID-19, as well as the African Rapid Response, or the funds that are going towards the African Rapid Response. Chair, one would like to indicate a concern with regards to South Africa's obligations to various multilateral and international agreements. Will the adjustments or cuts perhaps prohibit us from fulfilling our commitments with that regard? For example, in the case of the SKO Observatory Agreement. And then when it comes to CSIR, I think I truly want to indicate my appreciation, or our appreciation, for the ability for the CSIR to clearly outline how the budget cuts or amendments, or sorry, adjustments, have an impact each particular program or operational area. I think it was very clear, and it was comprehensible, you know, for one to go through. But Chair, from all these presentations, I'm extremely concerned about the ability for entities to recover from these cuts. I think my colleague who spoke before me has already alluded to this, and the ability for the sector at large, or the department and its entities, to recover from this in the long run. And also showing concern, which would be informed by the CSIR's presentation, on the possible retrenchment in the future, perhaps not now, perhaps not in this particular year, financial year, but the financial year to come, particularly, or even, you know, we don't know what's going to happen towards next year. We're in a very unpredictable terrain and environment, and things are forever changing. So one is very concerned about any particular retrenchment that would come out of that. And I think it's, what I'm about to say might sound so illogical, but I'm noting that there will be a cutback on science communication or conferences or that kind of work. I think, Chair, it remains important for there to be some sort of conversation or communication that comes out of the department and its entities. Even if we're not having physical conferences, but I think it's important that there be webinars or cyber chats or anything that's within, you know, doable measures, to ensure that all the hard work that has been done by the department and its entities to bring about, to bring about awareness, to bring about awareness on what is happening in the sciences is not regressed. And I think I feel like I'm illogical because I'm saying, we must communicate to young people out there using radio, using television stations or broadcasters to say this is what happens in the sciences. And maybe we can even relate it to work that is currently being done in the sciences relating to COVID to draw more young people into the space. But I feel that it's illogical to say what I'm saying in light of the fact that there's such huge cuts when it comes to funding bursaries in the space. But Chair, look, I don't have questions particularly to the department and its entities, but perhaps one would just want to reiterate various concerns that they have when looking at the presentations that have been made with regards to the adjustments to the budget of the department and its entities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Honorable Boshoff.
Thank you, Chair. I want to commend all three presentations because I think it was extremely bad news told particularly well. And if I could summarize all of it, it seemed to me like if the whole science ecosystem within the state influence sphere was a farming enterprise, then they decided this year we are not going to tend to the fences, we are not going to grade the roads, we are not going to dose the sheep, we are going to save on everything which is not essential, and then we'll hope we'll still be in business next year. I think what we see is actually what happens if the economy comes to a standstill. Some people thought of it as something which just impacts on large businesses and monopoly capital and stuff. But it's the everyday reality of ordinary people like students and like scientists, which is influenced. What I would, just as a matter of jest, and one should not say you are going to tell a joke, but sometimes one has to, otherwise somebody might take you seriously. But I always thought the CSIR is a money laundering scheme, and now I witnessed that they will launder the money, the notes. But my specific question I want to ask, I see Dr. Rob Adam is available tonight. What is the exact impact on the SKA of a 41% cut? I didn't quite understand the presentation said something like there's accumulated funds and therefore none of the critical expenditure needs to be cut or something, but I mean 41%, one needs to very much to say 41%. And what I'm particularly concerned about is, as usual, the communities around that area, because the economic activity of farming has been greatly reduced. We've mentioned that. And the promise was, but there's going to be such an influx of money in the operations of the SKA. And I just want to make sure that that is not negatively impacted. Maybe Dr. Adam can enlighten us on that. And then I just want to add my little bit of pessimism that next year is not going to be a better year for this department with a 7% downward growth. Nothing's going to get better. So, well, what shall we say about that? It's a great pity. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Don't be a pessimist, Dr. Boshoff. Let's hope for the best. Honorable Mananiso.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me start by welcoming all the presentations. And one would start with CSIR with regards to what they have alluded in terms of non-critical vacancies. I just want them to explain to me. For example, they must give example what kind of are those particular vacancies. And on the issues of the cuts with regards to the impact of COVID-19, I think I'm partly covered on what Ulo has said and Honorable Bazoli. However, one wants to say that in terms of COVID-19, we have learned that science and technology, it is our solution to the problems or challenges. However, I need as well some explanation with regards to page 5 of the NRF on the issue that they have alluded that they're not going to have budget cut on supporting programs. And I just need specific in terms of total numbers per their programs, how many people will benefit. And Chairperson, I have a question for Ms. Bia because of she has problem with connectivity. Ms. Bia is asking what is the criteria that is being used to reduce as the beneficiaries of students. Lastly, Chairperson, mine is on NRF again. I want to echo the same sentiment like Ulo said. There are other programs that can be done to replace the National Science Week and National Olympics. So I just want to check with the department what are other alternates that they can do rather than scrapping off the programs and then they don't do anything. So that one will actually rob us what we know as best program from the CSIR and NRF. Lastly, Chairperson, yesterday I've asked the question. I have asked here the question with regards to gender-based violence programs or any solutions that they have, as previously they've presented on programs that they are having with regards to responding to GBV. I want to check as well with this unit that is there any programs perhaps that they would have with regards to responding to GBV because of GBV has been declared as a pandemic. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Naniso. The Science Week, I missed it last year, and I know that you attended it, and the review was quite excellent. So I'm sure you are speaking from a very subjective but very passionate view about having attended the Science Week. Thank you very much, Honorable Naniso. Honorable Letsia.
Thank you very much, Chair. My network keeps on cutting. So if it does, please let me know. Let me also join the chorus of welcoming the reports. I think that the department is doing extremely well, generally since the beginning of the 6th Parliament. At least we can account for that. They've done extremely well. They've done well in maintaining their targets. They've done well in accounting for the budget that they've been given. And their presentations are not vague, are always on point, and I want to congratulate them on that. To the DG, I just wanted to check, DG, was there any work put into motivating to Treasury why the department can be classified as essential service department, and so that it does not get the 20% proposal of budget cuts. I'm asking this because of the work the department is doing on the COVID issue. Also on the fact that we have we're in a period where we believe the fourth industrial revolution is part of us, will be part of us for some time, and that is your work. That is the work that you do. Was there any work put to motivating to Treasury why we can't be classified, why the department can be classified as an essential service department? I think on the budget cut also, I would also like to check in the department whilst we are doing the motivation. There was a talk that spoke to you guys, and not to Treasury this time, but to the department itself, that the entities should be exempted from budget cuts on the basis that one, even last year, in July when we were doing the budget, we did say that we believe that the department is underfunded, and we should look at ways of improving that. Was there any work in that space? And Chairperson, before maybe we deal with ATC on Friday, or adopting the report on before Friday, is there any work that we can do to persuade the department from cutting budget, already cut budget of these entities and this specific department? On CSIR, I would also like to congratulate, CSIR, we went to them earlier this year, and including Dr. Boshoff, everybody was very happy with the work done there at the department. And I would also like to congratulate them on their participation on the development of a vaccine. I saw a statement the other day that we're taking part there, and I know it's us through CSIR on the development of this thing. Just one question: are we utilizing the services of BioVac in this thing, and what support can we give directly to BioVac as a vaccine entity of some sort, to capacitate them enough so that next time when we have an outbreak of this nature, worse or better, we at least have capacity in the country to deal with such. On NRF, I saw a very disturbing slide there that will do cuts on funding of postgraduate students. And I know I got cut off when Professor Bozolo was speaking about it. I heard Honorable Mkashwa speaking about it, and I also want to add my voice on this thing. I don't think it's good that we're cutting on funding, especially given the skills level we have in this country. So I think maybe if there's anything, we must look at other things. If it means NRF must be exempted, Chairperson, the point I made earlier, maybe we must work on that point. The last part, just a general comment that yesterday when we were dealing with the higher education, they made in their presentation, even though I was also being cut off and on, they also made mention that they have avoided at all costs from funding students. Is there anything, Chairperson, that we can do between today and maybe Friday that we can mitigate against cutting off of postgraduate funding? Because I think this will have a negative, devastating effect in the long run. Maybe not this financial year, maybe not the next one, but in the foreseeable future, we're likely to see the effects of us having cut the postgraduate funding in this country. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Gates. Honorable Letsie, can we get the last Honorable Member Gates? Honorable Gates, are you still up?
Yeah, Chairperson, you see the electricity just switched off. Yeah. The reason why I'm trying to make my point. I mean, it can't be on. Like now, when you are just calling Honorable Gates, the electricity just go off. I mean, really, but I'm going to I'm sorry. Now start from the end where Honorable Gates ended. Sorry? Chairperson.
Apologies for that.
Okay, there is no problem. Now, as I have said, I would like to begin from where Litsi have left off, right? About the effectiveness of having these kind of engagements, how important they are, having them in this kind of a platform. I mean, I think we are not doing justice to very important discussions that need our undivided attention. Now we must deal with all this load shedding and all that. Yesterday, I couldn't make, or the EFF couldn't put their contributions in the discussions yesterday. And as a result, it looks like we're competent in the eyes of our people out there. They are watching. And every time when we have to enter, we're managed like that. But let me go straight to the reports. I think we all agree that we are living under uncertain times, and no one can be able to predict what will happen tomorrow or even next year. And to other members, without being repetitive, I think it is very important the department to allow the cutting of funding of research and development. As I have mentioned, the importance of research is not about finding solutions on the vaccine. I think that is where we are starting to be narrow-minded.
Hey, connection is quite bad.
The research and the research capacity that should not only focus on that. There are a lot of areas that we need to focus on. For instance, surely, and Chair, I can't be heard.
No, the connection is quite bad, and the line is not very good.
What about now? I'm quite clear.
No, yeah, maybe switch off the camera.
Okay, all right. Now, I was on that issue of budget cuts. I mean, we were just re-emphasizing the fact that it's not all about, developing capacity of, researching about these vaccines and how they will help our people. No. As we agree, and the World Health Organization do agree that we will have to change the way of living. And if we abandon the most significant part of research in terms of what happens from now, I mean, things are with capacity from the department to ensure that we meet the standard of that particular normal that we will reach at a certain stage that we are not sure of, even me and you. Now, you also look at how we, look at our priorities. There's too much money spent on unnecessary things that are going to put our people in danger. For instance, schools. People are in school, people are going to school, children are going to school. The funds are being rechanneled to go and benefit tenderpreneurs to sanitize schools. While money is being taken away from this important aspect that we have always been mentioned. I mean, we can't always be speaking about the same thing over and over again. And maybe we'll start waking up at a very later stage when this coronavirus have already made significant impact and maybe taken a lot of our people, even those that are very close to us. That's when we on how our tourism industry is going to look like, on how our education content will look like moving forward, because some of these things might not be necessary moving forward. These other things that we normally go to school to study for, right? I don't want to repeat too much, Chairperson. I understand that some of the members have touched on the indigenous knowledge system, and it falls under this research capacity that we thought the department will prioritize this aspect, and the government itself too. I mean, what kind of government it is? I mean, just to neglect important issues like this ones. I think let me leave it there, Chair. This load shedding is making me
Okay. All right. Yeah, your line is quite bad, Honorable Gaze, but we understand it's load shedding. You can be rest assured you are not being managed by myself. Not yesterday, not today. I really would want to hear your views, but we are all being managed by ESCOM. It is ESCOM that decides on this load shedding, and it's quite terrible. Like I said yesterday, I mean, we work on virtual platforms and we require electricity to do that. And if ESCOM is not able to provide it, then disrupt our work. I'm told very soon on my side, power will be going, there will be load shedding. So if I get disconnected, please just know that it is load shedding. But otherwise, back to the issues. I think one consistent point that members are raising is to express a concern about the funding of the Department of Science and Innovation and in all its entities, the science institutes. I think members have expressed themselves quite clearly about this thing, and it's a view that I also share, that as it is now, the department is not is the least funded of all the departments, well, except the Department of Tourism. But if you check all the departments, the Department of Science and Innovation does not receive the funding from the fiscus that it should be receiving. Now, when you look at these cards, the department should not have been one of the departments that was supposed to be targeted, given the kind of work that its entities are doing. The NRF, so the CSIR, the kind of very good work that CSIR is doing in response to fighting this pandemic. So I think it's a collective view of the committee that the funding to the department is quite, it's not sufficient. And the National Treasury should not have identified the department as one of those to be to have budget cuts. Honorable Letsie asked a question that what is it that we can do before we finalize our report? I'm afraid not much that we can do, Honorable Letsie, because the system as it is structured currently, you know, is such that whatever budget that gets tabled by the Minister of Finance in Parliament, it's something that we, as Parliament, we just approve. Now, there is a law that has been introduced which allows us to make some changes, but we have not really exercised that option, and I don't think that we will be able to do that given the onerous processes that has to be followed in changing the budget that has been tabled by the minister. I think what we can do is just to express and make it a recommendation in our report that will be tabling on the ATC, and that will be discussed in Parliament. But I think most of the questions have been raised by the members. I also wanted to understand, like Honorable Boshoff, the 41% cut on the SKA, what impact is that going to have? The CEO was saying that there's been an accumulated funding So it's not going to have much impact, but 41% is quite substantial. So can we just get some assurance that it's not gonna have that much of an impact? But otherwise, most members, I think, raised the questions that I also had. Just to emphasize that, but I'm sure that I can always come back when we've answered the specific questions. Okay, can we start with the department, get to the CSIR, and then lastly NRF? We still have sufficient time to get the responses. DG?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. So I'll pick up those that I thought were fairly direct to the Department of Science and Innovation. I may ask Dan, if he's on the line, to respond to the question asked by Honorable Mkhatshwa on multilateral agreements broadly, and I assume Rob will then, and Dr. Kobela from the NRF, respond on the SKA specific. We can just touch on it briefly. So on the issue of Professor Pozzoli, Honorable Pozzoli, yes, I would be more than happy to come back to the Portfolio Committee to look at the total number of students who are affected, because the letters were finalized this week after we got our allocation letter from Treasury. And as you heard from a number of entities, they're still going to get board approvals on their side. And the numbers that are on our APP, of course, are also dependent on the entities and how they themselves manage those cards. So if there are inconsistencies at this point in time, it's a very good observation, but we should allow the entities and their boards to reconcile. And then if the chairperson is agreeable, we can then agree on the time to then bring the total number of students that are affected, because it's not only those that are funded by the parliamentary grant, but those that are funded in programs, such as the ones that we saw in the mining precinct, Samedi work that we're doing, and of course with many others in the entity. So we would be happy to do that. And I would leave the CSIR then to respond to the laser titanium robotics, as well as the intelligence of 40% potential parliamentary grant. And if I then move to Honorable Mkhatshwa, yes, we don't think that we would have to not meet our multilateral agreements. Even today at the SKA members meeting, we were able to indicate that we would meet our obligation for this year, overlapping up to next year. But the conversations that we've had with Treasury in relation to the SKA, the understanding at this point is that the monies that were taken away will be returned in the outer year, so the next financial year and the outer year. So that's the gentleman's agreement. Of course, it's not written down, but that's how we understand it. But for now, we don't anticipate huge inability or not being able to meet these agreements broadly, and this one for the SK in particular for now. And then the point that Honorable Mkhatshwa raised around science communication, we agree with you. And there are a number of instruments that we are trying to try and communicate even in these difficult circumstances. The two ministers of science and innovation and the Minister of Health have, for instance, agreed to have a webinar where a conference in the webinar on the contribution by research into COVID in South Africa, how research and the NSI has responded in support of the work that the Department of Health has had to do. So we're continuously looking for opportunities where we do this. But yes, of course, specifically for students, maybe not so much, but I'm sure the NRF has some ideas of being innovative around this. And Dr. Adam, perhaps, as I say, will respond to the SKA, especially in relation to how it affects the communities in the area. And then if I move to Honorable Mananiso and the point that you've raised around gender-based violence, I don't think we have anything specific in the department that I can think of, but I suspect that the best entity that would be able to respond to that would be the Human Sciences Research Council. So if the chair agrees, this is a question that we would like to reflect on and come back to the committee on. And then Honorable Letsie, the question that you posed, or the comment of motivating to be an essential service to National Treasury. Yes, we did. All departments, we are classified in an economic services group of departments. We did indicate that we don't think cuts should be effected to ourselves and the entities, but they indicated they need cash. And we were faced with an option of either we do this in a way that would minimize impact, or they would do it for us. And we thought that it would be better for us to try and see how best we can do this without really having the long-term impact of the work that we do. So attempts, yes, were made, but we didn't win the battle. In fact, they reminded us that other departments would be cut at more than 20%. So in a sense, accepting that we are lucky with 20%. The battle that we won, as the CFO indicated, was a battle of saying the 324 million that was already reprioritized for COVID-related could be included as part of the 20%. And we indicated some of the work that, at least for now, we've done, but we continuously look for the NSI's contribution to COVID. And then on BioVac, yes, there are discussions that are already happening around how should we prepare the BioVac to support and capacitate them to manufacture a vaccine for COVID if it is found. And we have been contacted by the World Health Organization and other vaccine manufacturers whether we have the space. We are preparing to be the manufacturer of the vaccine, especially for the rest of the continent, and that work is in progress. And we think we are prepared to take that challenge when the vaccine has been found. And then the point, as you indicated, Chair, raised by Honorable Kieza, we agree that generally the funding that we receive is less than ideal, but we try and do the best with what we have. And we really would appreciate the committee using whatever platforms that you have at your disposal also to raise these issues. But we also try and fight where we can. I do, however, like to, in my last comment, to say that we all have an opportunity to think creatively around the budgets, because as we have heard from the Minister of Finance, that we will all have to do zero-based budgeting. So I think we've got a couple of months to think creatively around how are we going to do this in times that are uncertain to make sure that we minimize the long-term impacts on the overall budget. As we indicated, it's never easy to try and balance, because sometimes even if you say you don't want to cut budget on students, and we all agree on that, but if you don't have researchers to train these students, because they have also been cut, you will not be able to train the postgraduate students. But I'm making a point that the zero-based budgeting that we have to do probably offers us some opportunity to think creatively around some of the immediate challenges that we all anticipate in the next year or two whilst COVID is with us. Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to hand over to the CSIR.
Okay, thank you very much, DG. CSIR.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson. So some of the questions have been addressed by the DG, but I'll speak to those which are specific to the CSIR. The first one is around whether the projects that are being cut by the CSIR would have any impact in terms of students. I think a number of them, yes, they would have an impact in terms of the number of students within the system. For instance, we are cutting our bursary program, so there's a direct impact there.
Can we see you, or do you have got a problem with the?
Unfortunately, I'm in the dark. I've load shedding here, so
Okay.
can you see me now? I've got a light right in front of my face. So yes, there will definitely be an impact. I think the examples I gave, our bursary program, our rental pool program, the African Laser Center, but even some of the research and development programs where there are students that are involved, I think there will definitely be an impact. We will supply these numbers to the DSI to consolidate and to provide a response, a comprehensive response to the portfolio committee. In terms of the impact on the reduction in budget on, for instance, the laser programs, the Titanium Center of Competence, and so forth, fortunately, these programs will still have some funding available to them. So it's a reduction in funding. So there will definitely be delays in terms of the delivery and the execution of the programs, as well as ensuring that we have sufficient capacity. Our view is that in the long term, this can be addressed in terms of ensuring that in future we can and bring them back to the right level of funding for us to be able to get back to where we ought to be with regard to the execution of these programs. So it's not a situation of they will be completely lost from the system, because they will continue, albeit at a lower level of funding. With regards to the question on predictive modeling, certainly we can provide this report to the portfolio committee, and we'll be very glad to even engage with the portfolio committee in terms of some of the work that we've done in this regard in a much more detailed manner. We welcome the comments by Honorable Kaichwa around the work that we have done. Then on the issue of retrenchments, I think I can see a question here. I cannot see very clearly because of the load shedding. The 40%, let me go back to the 40% example that we gave. So here, we started with this work of doing scenario analysis on the impact of COVID on the CSIR very early on, around April, in fact, in preparation for a board discussion that we had in May. So at that time, we didn't know what the exact percentage reduction our parliamentary grant was going to be. So we in our scenario analysis, we had a 10%, 20%, and a 40% cut. So I think for this discussion, it's actually a moot point to look at the 40%, because as I said, it was part of very early work that we did in terms of scenario analysis. I think the engagements we've had with the Department of Science and Innovation, this matter hasn't come up, and we don't expect that this will be the case. I think we put this in as part of the very early work that we did in terms of the scenario analysis, as I've indicated. The issue of retrenchments, although we don't see this happening now, I think if the cuts that we are seeing become the trend in terms of what one will be experiencing going forward, I think we might reach a point where we'll have to consider this as an issue that we'll need to look at to ensure that we can sustain the organization going forward. Particularly because, I mean, for an organization like the CSIR, 75% of our costs is related to human resources, because we're a knowledge-based organization. So we will need to look into that if the situation continues into the future. The issue around non-critical vacancies, I think this was raised within the context of the core business of the CSIR. So when we talk about critical and non-critical vacancies, and the critical vacancies are those vacancies which we consider to be part of the core business of the CSIR. So this is the science, engineering, and technology base of the organization. So those will be considered critical within the organization. But even within that, there could be junior positions which we create to create an opportunity for training for young people, as well as senior positions that are necessary for us to deliver on critical projects and contracts that we have within the CSIR. So even within the set base, there is a grading that one can apply in terms of the criticality of the position to the core business. But at a broad level, we are talking about critical positions in set, and then we have non-critical positions who are in the support functions in particular. For instance, to give an example, we employ people who are boardroom assistants or people who are personal assistants. Now, those positions, even though they are important, they are not considered critical, because you can make arrangements in terms of how those roles can be fulfilled through acting arrangements and so on and so forth. So that is the basis of the differentiation between critical and non-critical positions. And the point that we're making is that we're carefully looking at all the vacancies we have in the organization and delaying the appointment of those positions that we consider to be non-critical, that we can do with in the short term without having to fill those particular positions. I think those were all the questions that were related to the CSIR, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Just switch off your mic. Okay, thank you very much, CEO. Chair, you don't want to add, the chair of the board of CSIR?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I think the CEO has summed it up very well. There's just one question perhaps that the CEO ought to respond to. The one on BioVac, whether BioVac is involved in this. That question came from Honorable Letsier.
Okay.
No, thank you very much for the reminder, Chairperson. I was going to piggyback on the response by the DG, but maybe I can ask my colleague, Dr. Rachel Chukwamba, to speak to some of the interactions that we've had with BioVac. Rachel?
Thank you very much, CEO. I think suffice it to say what the DG said is correct, which is that in all our projects, we've responded as a system, looking into the role that each part of the system plays in contributing to whatever solution we're developing. So in the context of vaccine development, much as we're doing product development and early stages of that work, we expect to leverage the capabilities of BioVac in terms of their ability to break down bulk drug substance, finish, polish, and distribute, but also in putting together consortia and international partnerships. That capability is also discussed. So we engage on these matters, whether it is early R&D, the downstream part of it is undertaken by them, whether it is putting consortia in place. We recognize the capability that the BioVac has, and we include them in consortia to play the particular role that plays to their strength as it is. And DG did mention their expanding capabilities on actual manufacture when it comes to vaccine production. So I have nothing much more to add.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we go to NRF? Maybe let's start with the chair, and then she will hand over to CEO.
Yes. No, thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and the members of the committee for the engagement. And I think in terms of how we're going to organize ourselves in responding to the various questions addressed specifically to NRF, the first came from Honorable Pozzoli in terms of the long-term effect on the budget cuts, as well as the guarantee from National Treasury. And I'll request the CEO as well as the CFO to take us through that. And then, of course, the one on the SKA, the 41% budget cut, Dr. Rob Adams will also engage on that particular one to clarify in terms of, how these cuts have been done or implemented, and why, in terms of the international commitments, we are still committing to that. And then on the consideration on the active students bursaries, Dr. Pillay and the CEO will also take the members through what is it that we have put in place for the active students, the bursaries that are currently being active. And then also lastly, on the question from Honorable Mananiso regarding the innovative alternatives, instead of cancelling the science engagement programs, especially the Science Week, and that we must have alternative programs Dr. Beverly Damanso, who is in charge of those programs, will also explain, what are the considerations in terms of the science engagement programs. Thank you, Chair, and over to CEO and the CFO.
Okay. CEO.
Honorable Chair, thank you. I've done a lot of talking, so with your permission, let me ask my colleague, Mr. Singh, to talk to whether or not National Treasury ever gives guarantees, Chairperson.
Okay.
Thank you, honourable members and Chairperson. I think the CEO has just answered that. I think it's very unlikely that in this uncertain times that National Treasury will give guarantees at this point in time. As a matter of fact, we have no indication yet of any of the outer years, any of the outer 2 years of our MTF allocation. So, Chair, the long and short of it is, answer is no, we don't have any guarantees. Neither do we have confirmation of the 2 outer years of the MTF allocation in terms of our planning going forward. So we have to make some assumptions, which is something that we have responsibly started to do, and we will be deliberating further on that in the coming week in terms of how we wish to deal with the outer years of the MTF allocation. So the answer at this point is no guarantees. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Who else wants to come?
Person. The next one would be Dr. Rob Adam, and maybe, if necessary, Dr. Clifford Momani, to talk to the issue of our international commitments, as well as the explaining like that the cut to the SKA budget will not have any negative implications to the project. Rob?
Chair and CEO, I hope everyone can hear me, and good evening. Yes, let me just give some historical context to the reason that we had this money in the first place. The international treaty was signed in March 2019 for the formation of the SKA Observatory. However, that had to be ratified, as was done in the South African Parliament and as recommended by this very committee, in each of the member countries. That process has been going on. It was originally expected to have finished this month in July, and as a result of that, we were supposed to have a meeting. The very first meeting of the Observatory Council was scheduled for July. However, that's obviously not going to happen. And at this stage, the estimate is probably early in the new year will be the earliest that could happen. Now, how does this affect the budget? Well, each country has to pay in an agreed amount to fund the construction of the telescope. And we had budgeted by agreement with DSI and National Treasury to pay over the bulk of the money that's been cut in the current financial year to help fund the construction. Of course, ultimately the money comes back into South Africa by and large to South African companies, because there's this principle of fair work return, so that it's South African money that funds South African companies ultimately. But nevertheless, we have to pay that into the central kitty for this to be implemented. And so effectively, the reason that we could, without any impunity and effect on the project, agree to part with the money was because actually we don't need it this year. We'll need it next year. There, of course, that probably amounts to about 80% of the cut. There's some other projects, for example, attached to infrastructure for the Meerkat extension that will be slowed down a bit. Contracts were due to be placed towards the end of this financial year. We won't be able to place the contracts. So, really what it boils down to is that because of COVID, the whole SKA project is slowed down by probably 9 months. Now, does that have any effect on, going to the question asked by Honourable Boshoff, the communities in the Karoo? Answer long term is no, the project's going ahead. Short term, no as well, because, I mean, just in the last month, I've signed over social development type grants to different community organizations and institutions in the Karoo area. We didn't cut any of that money. The only money we've cut is money that we wouldn't actually have spent as a result of COVID in this financial year. I understand that the delays in the international project are caused by several factors. Obviously, one of these factors is that COVID affects the whole world. And so every single country that's a member of the SKA is affected as we are. And so they have their own budget constraints and concerns. And they're going through the same kinds of discussions that I guess we're going through now. Also, there's the issue of travel. You know, for example, the prototype dish that's being constructed in the Karoo, the first SKA dish, which would add on to Meerkat. That's a project which is largely coordinated by China and Germany. They can't travel here now. And so that's slowed down. And so everything slows down as a result of the COVID interruptions. So just in summary, then that's the reason that we can, without feeling any pain at all, hand over this money for useful application to fight the effects of COVID. Thank you very much, Chair.
Chairperson, thanks very much, Rob. And maybe if I could ask Clifford to talk about our other international commitments, Chair, with your permission.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just be short on that one. South Africa subscribes to a number of multilateral global research infrastructures in which you have.
We need to see you.
Oh, sorry, Chair. So South Africa subscribes through a membership structure to a number of multilateral or global research infrastructures that no one country could afford, just like the SKA. And in our case, those include the CERN, which is the European Nuclear Research Organization, as well as the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Russia, as well as the European Synchrotron Radiation Facility. All of those are our participation as a country by our researchers and postgraduate students is supported with funding from DSI, which is managed by the NRF. All of those, because it's a subscription-based, membership-based kind of structure, the obligations that we have towards those cannot be postponed or cancelled just like that. So we, in terms of the principles and approaches we've adopted, there will not be any cuts related to those activities, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chairperson, with your permission as well, the last one around explaining the postgraduate student issue. As I tried to explain, Chair, and Dr. Pillay will hopefully elucidate, we do not intend to cut any active students. So I'll ask my colleague, Dr. Garrison Pillay, just to explain again how we are approaching this matter.
Good evening, everyone. As you've seen on the slide presentation, one of the principles that we put out there is that the budget cuts will not affect postgraduate students. This was to minimize the effect in securing the next generation of researchers, which has been a concern, obviously. And I'm glad that the honourable members have focused on the importance of ensuring that we do secure the next generation of researchers. Having said that, this only affects the postgraduate students of the current year. Given that there is a new DSI NRF policy on postgraduate students, which includes full cost of bursaries and partial cost of bursaries, obviously the number of students that will be supported into the future will decrease. The only way to address that would be to increase the resources. But we're alerting Parliament to the fact that in the intention, with the objective of retaining students, we have now developed the full cost bursary model, and that will come into effect in 2021. Therefore, the net effect would be that if we stick with the same budget, there'll be a reduction in the number of students. This is an important area to protect, especially if we want to ensure that we advance the transformation agenda of ensuring a representative workforce going into the future. I think it's also important that I respond to a question raised by one of the honorable members about gender-based violence. And that is that when you look at the South African Research Chairs Initiative, there are a number of chairs in the community of practice that actually deal with gender-based violence. So allow me to stop there, but I'm quite happy to take any further questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Honorable Chair, there's one last question that we haven't responded to.
Okay.
And that is whether we have some creative, innovative ways of reaching learners and educators in the schooling system with regard to the various science engagement programs. And I'm going to request, with your permission, my colleague, Dr. Beverly de Mons, to respond to that.
Thank you, Honourable Chair and members. Yes, I do think the community has engaged and taken up very quickly to the idea that because of the cancellation of all public-facing entities, public-facing...
Doctor.
Hello?
We can't see you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Are you in the dark also?
No, fortunately not. Maybe later, 10 o'clock. So
Okay.
I'll get finished. Okay, so what we have is that we have found that many of the festivals, especially ones like SciFest Africa, for example, have capability to move many of their lectures onto online and virtual platforms. So lectures that would have been held at the festival itself, many of those scientists have been able to give those same lectures to public audiences who are able to connect online or on different virtual platforms. The Science Center network around the country, those who have the capability as well, have taken to these virtual platforms, much like the ones we are using now, or Zoom, and they continue to provide both learner and educator support and fun entertainment, science content and development. For example, the Cape Town Science Centre offers and has had a great response to science matric classes, Zoom Science Online, and hosting science coding activities, etc. And these apparently have been very well subscribed to. So we have seen an adaptation to technology in that live online environment in the centers that have that capability. For the postgraduate students, you would know that our issue of communicating science, postgraduate students have been for the last number of years taking part in the FAME Lab competition and international competition, and South Africa has done very well in those finals, and that is continuing with the postgraduate community online, and the finals will be held this month on the online platform as well. So we are seeing this move from physical interactive format into the online format. The other move that has been quite successful is a partnership with community radio and community television. In the month of July, the NRF has partnered with Soweto TV, community TV, to host a series of educational inserts around the work done by mostly scientists out of the SACHI initiative on issues of health and science-based issues that affect the communities, and working on these. There is a young science journalism program that is training interns and unemployed youth in science journalism, and they work with community radio, more especially at the provincial level. So we do see that this type of partnership with radio and TV has really taken off. And then the other online platforms like publications on the Conversation Africa and special resource publications on COVID for school learners and for educators has moved very well. So I think work is ongoing.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. I was requesting that you pause there.
Yes, I'm finished now. Thank you.
Yeah, when I say please, can you stop just complying? Okay, I think I would like to wrap up.
Chair, can I just ask a question?
Okay, I was gonna say, I see your hand up, Honorable Pozzoli. I want to wrap up, make it quick.
Just a clarification, just a quick
Okay.
clarification. Dr. Ganson-Pillay talked about how no students will not be funded, but in the department's slide 18, their APP target has gone down from 3,100 to 2,000, and 9,200 to 6,000. That means 4,400 fewer students in the APP. So could you just clarify what you mean by no students will be affected? Thank you.
Honourable Chair, if I may respond.
Okay.
Professor Pozzoli, as you would have noticed from the presentation made by the CEO, one of the principles that we adopted is that we will not have any budget cuts on student grants. Therefore, the numbers that we projected for the current year would remain as the number that we would support. Obviously, the impact of COVID-19 has also had an effect on the uptake of the scholarships. And therefore, the information provided by the CEO in his presentation includes the rate of uptake of the scholarships. By the 30th of May, we extended that till the 12th of June, and there hasn't been an optimal uptake at that time. As part of that budget cut, we have used the bursaries that have not been taken up by the extended date to be part of that COVID-19 budget cut savings. Thank you.
Okay, maybe let's get the DG to clarify that one, because the targets were projected revision or proposed revision in the DSI APP.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Just briefly, as we indicated, we'd like to do the reconciliation, number one. Number two, the DSI not only funds the NRF, but it funds other programs, including the NRF. So can we just do the reconciliation, and then we will come back with the final numbers. But as we've also indicated, we've probably estimated the numbers on the basis of the budget that were cut, but if the entities have got different ways of augmenting that, those numbers might change. And then quickly, we have responses to Honorable Mananiso on gender-based violence, but because we don't have enough time, we're happy to just put that down in writing, both from the NRF's initiatives and the work that we're doing with the Human Sciences Research Council. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I think let's do that. Just put it in writing and then send it to the committee. I think we've come to the end of the discussion. It has not been it has been almost like a very bleak kind of a scenario that has been painted about these cards. And I think the committee has already expressed itself about how disappointed and concerned it is about the further cuts to the already underfunded department. And whatever platform that we get, I guess members will be able to express that. And we'll see, working with the minister, on how we can work around that. Because one of the National Development Plan targets is also to increase as a percentage of the GDP, the investment in R&D. And I think generally when you target DSI and its entities to cut, so you are impacting on that NDP target, which is a very important target. I know that the investment comes from both private and public, but in the past presentation, I think it has been demonstrated that the bulk of the investment comes from public sector and the public entities. And the DSI and its entities is almost like the driver of that program, and how that has to be also articulated. So this cut is going to impact heavily on the scientists, and I think it's something that we should be very concerned about. But I don't think it has to be doom and gloomy. I mean, the information that has been shared with us, 10,000 ventilators that are ready to be delivered by the CSIR together with the other entities. It's an excellent news. Locally manufactured, locally developed, and something that will be responding to the pandemic. And I think, as we know, that these ventilators are quite critical instruments or machines that are used in hospital to attend to the patients. So it's also a good news in a way, but as members have said, I think much more needs to be done, particularly to increase the funding for our scientists and for the department. But as always, after interacting with the department and the entities, one get a sense that there is too much work, very good work that is being done by scientists, by public officials employed in the department and in the entities to better advance the interest of the country and to put the country on a map, on a good pedestal. So I think thank you very much. Continue doing the good work. I think this brings us to the end of the meeting. Just to remind members that we are meeting on Friday. So Friday we will be considering the minutes. We've got a couple of minutes that we have not finalized. We'll also be dealing with the reports, one of which is what we have been processing today. We need to adopt these reports so that they can be published in the ATC. There's 2 more reports I think that we'll be adopting. And then we have dedicated some enough time to brief the members on the framework document that has been prepared by ourselves regarding the inquiry into the SMU and the legal brief that we've received from legal services. So basically, it's a preparatory work that has been done to brief members so that we are all ready as we begin the inquiry. So that is something that we'll be doing on Friday. Otherwise, thank you very much, honorable members. Enjoy the rest of the evening under these conditions of lockdown and electricity load shedding. I hope members and everybody else is coping. Otherwise, let's take care of ourselves. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Jane. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, champion.
Bye, Shanaz.
Anele, Shanaz is the champion. Please greet them.